And then 5 days after that out-of-body experience, there was a bombing on Old Compton Street in a bar, exactly as I'd seen it in the OBE. I've had people say to me before, oh, but because you have this scientific perspective, that's why you're not seeing these things. And it's kind of like, well, actually, I did see these things, like majorly.
The more I talk to people, though, I start to see these different realities of what they think is happening here, and I'm always so interested by it, but also a little confused.
That we're just here to learn, which is such a horrible idea. It's all very well for privileged people living in the Western world, but you have to then apply that to people who are living in absolute starvation and poverty or abuse. I find that a very high proportion, it's over 80% plus, people get to the vibrational state with that. You still have to get that step further to the out-of-body experience, but it can help get you consistently to the launch pad, to the vibrational state.
You know, when you live in the world of woo-woo, I think you need a friend like Graham. I think we all could use a friend like Graham. He was a breath of fresh air. I mean, the way he speaks about things is very scientific. He doesn't get caught up in the excitement and the chaos of it. When you find out that you can go out of your body, it's pretty crazy, right? And he doesn't just accept things because it happened to him. He's very, look, this happened to me. This was my experience. It doesn't mean it's true for everybody else. And I think that is a great way to go about things, because it appears that the other side operates by how you think. And depending on how you're thinking or how you grew up or your belief systems really is what is going to happen. And that's kind of his theory on it. But we also talked about, you know, how he was able to predict a bomb or see it before it happened. I think it was 3 days or maybe it was a week prior, but that's where I first found out about him, is through another podcast. And I was like, whoa, this guy's legit. He teaches OBEs. He also has an audio track that he created that has a 80% success rate of getting you to that vibrational stage. You still have to pop out after that, but it gets you close. I bought it myself. I should have tried it before I came on here to verify how it works, but I did buy it because I'm going to start hopping back into all this. So I think you guys will really like this conversation. Let me know down below what you guys think. Without further ado, let's get on with it. I guess my first question to you is, are you still doing out-of-body experiences? Because I noticed your YouTube's kind of halted for a little bit. You're not promoting that as much. Are you still pretty active?
I'm still doing OBE work. Yeah, I just am very skeptical about social media.
Okay.
I took a step back from the public eye for a few years, basically, but I haven't changed my own practice. But now I've just released a new version of my second book, so with new chapters and updated it, etc. So I'm doing a bit more stuff, but yeah, I keep my posting of anything quite minimal.
Yeah, I saw that. And then you updated the book, I think, in November 2024, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What did you update? Was it just new techniques? Is it just a new understanding?
It's basically updated what I've been learning and developing over the sort of decade, 13 years or so since the original version. So discovering new science, I'm not a person who just goes by hearsay and kind of my own opinion and stuff like that. I try to dig in as much as possible to the science and also do innovative science that kind of opens up more information and more possibilities about the subject. I think there's so much that we don't know, and unfortunately most people are not interested in the science. They're just doing the same old sort of astral projection stuff that we've heard for 200 years. You know, and I think there's so much more to discover. There's so much we don't know. So I guess with the book, some of the things I've discovered, some of the things I've sort of highlighted in terms of my own experiences, but I've also seen in the experiences of people I've worked with over the years. I've been working with this and teaching it even for, getting on for 40 years now. So, it's a big deal in my life.
Yeah. I find there's three groups. There's the skeptics, there's the people who are very curious, like they want to believe, but they're just like, man, I've never had an experience to validate any of this.
Hmm.
But they watch the videos, they see the thousands of comments of people saying they can do it. So they're kind of on that line. And then there's the people who've had an experience. And those people you don't really have to convince because they're like, okay, this is yeah, personal experience to me trumps everything. What do you say to, I guess, that middle group? Because the skeptics, it's like I've never seen a comment, right, or anything ever change someone's mind who's just like dead set on this not being real. Because it's like, okay, like it's fine. But what do you say to the people like, okay, I see that, like, what is this science on it?
I think the skeptics are actually quite interesting to talk to, because I think in some ways those people in the middle ground, when you have a dialogue with the skeptics and you reveal that they don't know much about the science often, it really does kind of hit those people in the middle who are like, oh, okay, this guy is actually engaged with the science, been in actual experiments, which, as far as I'm aware, I'm the only person teaching this and writing about this who's actually been in the lab, done experiments on different aspects of psi. And you do wonder, why is that? Why is no one else doing that kind of thing? Why is no one else engaging with the science? And that can be frustrating for me, but also in a way it's good, because I can kind of take a unique perspective to people, and I can kind of have those debates with skeptics, which I think is also something that I've uniquely done. I've been willing to go out there and debate people like Susan Blackmore and these kind of big name skeptics, and show that, well, while they have a valid perspective, they're not giving the full picture. And I think that what's important is to have a degree of skepticism. I think that's healthy. We should be skeptical about claims and about experiences and all of that kind of stuff. So I think the people on the fence are actually probably the most sort of healthy kind of way of looking at it in many ways. Obviously, if you've had experiences, that's going to change your mind. But some people who've had experiences are still kind of on the fence, because maybe they haven't had a veridical or objective verified experience. And I think I was like that at the beginning. I had probably 6 months to maybe even a year before I had an experience that I could say I perceived something, or had information from the experience that couldn't have come in another way, that sort of validated the experience. So up until that point, I didn't really know, is this some kind of hallucination? Definitely wasn't a dream in my case. So I'm never asleep when I have out-of-body experiences. I don't do it via lucid dreaming. I have never experienced sleep paralysis. So there's a lot of myths out there that you have to have all those things in order to have an out-of-body experience. So I think that part of my interest is also to kind of explore the myths and the popular beliefs that have been repeated and repeated for decades, and ask if they're actually true. So yeah, back to your question, I think, the best way to address the people in the middle ground is to actually address the hard-nosed skepticism and reveal it for what it is, that often it's not well informed and not actually very scientific.
So when you're speaking to someone who's a skeptic on this, what is that low-hanging fruit that you usually go to that they don't typically know or understand, like on a science perspective? What is that? What do you say?
Well, I guess they will usually say there is no scientific evidence for anything psychic whatsoever, and then I'll start by referencing usually the most well known, I guess, in terms of solid evidence would be the Ganzfeld experiments that have been conducted for decades, and especially after the late 90s, early 2000s, the controls and protocols in those experiments became extremely tight, actually tighter than in many mainstream forms of research. So that's now been looked at through meta-analysis. So lots and lots of studies all compiled together and analysed, and shown that there's a consistent effect for telepathy over, over hundreds, thousands of trials. So that's a good sort of starting point, that most people are completely unaware of that. Then we have things like remote viewing, which are closely aligned to an out-of-body experience, i.e. a remote perception at another location. So we can talk about different research looking at remote viewing, obviously the original Stargate study, for example, but then also research that's been conducted afterwards. I was part of a 14-week study with the Rhine Research Center where we had blind targets that were set up in the US. I was at the time living in Estonia, so wasn't even in the same country. And I was trying to remotely perceive these targets. I used a combination, sometimes remote viewing techniques, sometimes out of body experiences to try and perceive the targets, and we got statistically significant results. I've also been involved in research looking at micro PK, so affecting things on a quantum level psychically, with the Institute of Noetic Sciences and Dean Radin. And now that, which also had positive results, and that research has now been replicated by numerous other institutions. So that's another body of evidence. Then I've also been involved in precognition research, and with Rupert Sheldrake, I got the highest score on a single experiment that he'd ever seen. So, and then again, with the precognition research, we have replication through many organizations that again show an effect consistently over many different people. The most robust research there is probably presentiment, as Dean Radin calls it, which is kind of feeling the future. It's sort of unconscious responses. So things like your pupils might dilate when something is about to happen, especially something emotional. So they've done experiments using emotional imagery. So what they found, what Dean Radin specifically found, is that there is an emotional response about 3 seconds before the emotional image is shown. So the person is psychically anticipating what is about to happen. That's obviously a controlled format, but it can happen in that kind of way in the real world as well. So,
wow. Do you hold Robert Monroe as, I guess, as someone who's done the most for this industry, or do you find his research wonky in a way? I'm just curious on your thoughts. Like, is he the standard, or what's your opinion on that?
I mean, he's obviously a very important figure. I think popularity doesn't always necessarily mean that that they're the most most interesting, maybe necessarily. I think people like Alex Tannis is very interesting as well, for example. But yeah, Robert Monroe, I think the thing that is good about what he did was he tried to approach things in a more systematic, more scientific way, and that was very important to the history of this field, I think. And the Monroe Institute was very important in terms of the development of remote viewing, was important in many different areas. So what he did is definitely very, very important. But I still think that that's kind of the past. I think where we are now, there's so much more potential, and I think we do have a greater understanding. I think Robert Monroe was more of an explorer rather than someone trying to understand the experience itself. And I think we still need to understand the experience itself. The exploration part is maybe more of a personal endeavor, is maybe how I would look at it. And for the community as a whole, we need to try and understand what the experience is and how we can better induce it more consistently, and especially the objective experiences, what I would call the peak experiences, or Yeah, those are the ones that we need to be able to harness more effectively.
What does that mean? The objective experience, the peak experiences.
Well, obviously, you can have an experience where you might come out of your body and you go to some beautiful natural environment or something, and you see all kinds of amazing landscapes, and it's stunningly beautiful, and it has a really powerful emotional and spiritual impact on you. And you come back to your body afterwards, and you're like, wow, that really changed me. But if I say that to someone else, they're like, oh, he was probably just dreaming or hallucinating. There's nothing tangible that I can take from that experience. So I guess when I say the objective experiences, I mean the ones where there are things that you see or perceive within the experience that can then be verified afterwards. And the things that show that the experience isn't just an hallucination, but is actually something tangible and real. And obviously, if we're going to move the research forward and move the whole area forward in terms of the people on the fence that you mentioned at the beginning, if we're going to move all of those people to kind of be more interested and open and engaged with the topic, then we need something to show those people, that it's a tangible thing. And that's what I mean by we need to understand how to get to those experiences more effectively.
How important do you feel are out-of-body experiences to the question that we as humans have been wrestling with forever, which is why we're here? How important do you think that is, like an out-of-body experience, to answering that question? Maybe I'll stop there because I have a lot more I want to ask you, but we'll stop with that.
I think that depends on the individual a lot, because I guess if that person is really curious about that topic, why are we here and what is our spiritual significance or purpose or all of those things, then they're going to focus more on exploring that question. Someone else might be more interested in maybe their own personal spiritual evolution, or maybe healing, like working with healing modalities, or I find there are all kinds of motivations when I'm teaching this. I will encounter people who are interested in questions of life after death, and other people who are more interested in the big question of, is there a God or something like that, and then other people are much more simple about it, and I just want to have an incredible experience and learn more about myself. So, it does really depend on the individual with those things. But I think from my perspective, I think it's been the most significant way to address those kinds of questions in my own life, because I can think of no more direct way to engage with your spirit, if you like, or your wider consciousness, your spiritual nature. Everything else is kind of secondary in many ways to something like literally being beyond your body and being in another environment or another reality. I can't think of anything else that can come close to that in terms of an experience. I mean, it's funny, people never question the purpose of meditation, for example, but they will often say to me, what's the purpose of an OBE? And I'm amazed by that question, because I'm kind of like, it's literally an experience of your own inner core, your spirit, your consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But it's the most direct way of experiencing it. Meditation's just sitting quietly somewhere. It's got a lot of potential, but I don't see how they don't see the potential with OBEs sometimes.
Sure. I mean, to me, what's crazier than realizing you are not just your body? I mean,
Exactly, yeah.
that alone, because you're right. In meditation, I'm still in, for example, I'm in my garage, right? I'm sitting in here, close my eyes. Even if you see colors or something, you're still in your head, right?
Yeah.
Or I guess it can go farther, but yeah, that's a good point. Okay, here's where I get a little lost, Graham, if I'm being honest. Because my experiences are very limited. I mean, I had the vibrational state. I learned from a guy named Darius. Are you familiar with him? Darius J. Wright?
I've watched like I think one conversation with him, but I don't know extensively about his stuff.
Okay, so I learned from him. I just liked how he talked. Again, he was probably one of the first people I came across, right? So there's that. But then I liked his whole thing to me, at least at the time, was like, don't listen to me. Like, go try it, right? Like, you go try it for yourself and you'll see. Like, go verify everything I'm talking about. And I liked that. Um, and so I did, and it took me a long time. It took me 6 months, really. It wasn't like I tried every day. I have kids, so it wasn't like every single day, every night I was giving it a go. But I really gave it an effort for probably at least 2, 3 times a week. Right? I would tell my wife, like, okay, I'm gonna go downstairs and try this. And she was always like,
Mm.
okay, good luck. I remember one time she told me, just as long as you're not seeing girls, I'm good with it. Made me laugh. So went downstairs, and it took me a while, but then I had my moments, and I'll skip everyone because they probably heard me say it a bunch. But um, the more I talk to people, though, I start to see these different realities of what they think is happening here, and I'm always so interested by it, but also a little confused. So Darius talks about, and we're going to assume that everyone I'm talking about here is actually doing what they say they're doing, right? Actually leaving their body. So let's just assume that for one, which is for you, a guy like you, not a great way to start, right? So we'll just assume that's the case. He says we're in a construct and we can come out and um, it is kind of like, here you're experiencing what you are not, right? It's a bit of a school, but maybe that's not the right word, but you are definitely learning and progressing, which is not the first time anyone's ever said that. Then
Mm.
there's the
And I
people.
find it a completely toxic opinion, to be honest.
Oh, so interesting. So yeah, I want to talk about this. So then I have talked to people who are more in line with the prison planet theory, right? And that being that Robert Monroe met famously in his second book that said, we are creating loosh and we are harvested. That's an interesting theory. It's like, okay, well, it's interesting. But then you have people who are doing soul retrievals, and like their whole thing is like, they go in and they retrieve people who don't realize they've died. And then you have people from what I know, you've kind of had that, like, I'm sure you've done other things, but one of your more famous ones is when you saw that explosion before it happened, right? Like I feel like you're more focused on this world and being able to prove, like you said, certain things here. And so I just get confused, like what is all this? And have you ever gone past, I guess, to these different planes that people talk about?
I have, but I guess the difference between me and those people is I don't assume that they're objective reality, and I'm skeptical of my own experiences as well as other things. And the reason for that is I've been doing this a long time. I mean, I was working with a teacher called Douglas Baker when I was about 14 years old. So I was already within that field. And what I was learning back then was that people have all kinds of belief systems. And he said to me when I was 14, I remember this really vividly, he turned to me and he said, oh, but of course you don't see in colour when you have your out-of-body experiences because you're under 18. Um, and I remember thinking, that's total nonsense. I've always seen in colour. I mean, sometimes I see in duotone, like singular colours, but, I've always seen in colour. And that was kind of a bit of a aha moment, I guess, because after that I realized we're just dealing with belief systems, prison planets, and that we're just here to learn, which is such a horrible idea. It's all very well for privileged people living in the Western world, but you have to then apply that to people who are living in absolute starvation and poverty or abuse, and you have to then assume that those people are going through that because they've chosen to come here to learn. And for me, I find that an absolutely vile, disgusting idea. That people are, that they've come here and chosen to go through all of that. It sounds fine if it's kind of like us and maybe like you've had some turmoil in your life or something, but ultimately you're in a good place. Then yeah, that can sound great. But I think you have to, with those kind of ideas, you have to look at the bigger picture and say, if you're saying that's all of us are here for that reason, and that's, people who are, that means that the Holocaust was all, those people chose to go through that. I just find that a really abhorrent idea, and I don't see any evidence to support it at all, either. So I find with a lot of these things, there's so many belief systems. You can almost have as many belief systems as there are people. So what do we do with that? How do we kind of navigate that situation? And that's really why I took a step back, and I had lots of experiences. This is true as well. This is an interesting thing as well. I had lots of experiences early on that I believed were completely objectively true, but then discovered they were not, that there was actually things that were false. I thought I'd met with a certain individual while out of body. I was completely convinced we'd had a conversation, and then afterwards found that wasn't the case, that there, you could argue that, okay, they did it unconsciously and they didn't remember or whatever.
How did you find out that it wasn't the case?
Because I spoke to them, and they had no recollection of it, but they told me. I mean, this wasn't just one occasion. This was kind of like multiple scenarios I'm referring to. But basically, over a period of time, I realized that what was generally understood to be the astral planes was not really an objective environment. And then actually, if you go back to the original literature, like A.E. Powell, for example, who wrote the book The Astral Plane, or and you look in there, the old writers literally said that as well. They said that it's an illusory environment. It's not an objectively real environment. It's a kind of thought created environment. So having said all that, I do think there are levels that do have objective reality to them, but they're not easy to access. And people who claim they are, I just say, well, have you taken part in any scientific experiments? Have you got any witnessed, verified experiences to back those claims up? Because I just don't see evidence that those environments are objective. It's really difficult to get to those kind of levels. And experiences like you mentioned with my Soho precognitive experience, that's not an experience you can have every day, or I can have every day, or anyone. I don't believe anyone can have that easily. It takes a depth and a intensity of experience that's quite rare. So that's what I meant when I said the peak experiences earlier on. There's something unique about the qualities that lead to that kind of experience. And that, I think, is part of the journey that we need to unfold and understand what it is that goes to those really intense experiences. But again, that's an amazing experience, partly because there were people in the room with me when it happened who witnessed the event. So, and I told them what I'd seen, that I'd seen this bombing. And I told them exactly what street it was on. I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I knew what street it was on, where on the street it was, etc. So those are the kinds of things that, for me, changed the game and made me realize that, okay, there is a valid, objective aspect to this, but it's something that you have to work towards. I think that we're actually, it's to do with our own mind how objective the experience is. So we have to work on stripping away the overlay, as I call it. We get this, basically our perceptions can be distorted by our own mind, and our own beliefs, our own emotions, like fear and things like that, can play into how we perceive and how we interact with the environment. And so the more we can work with that, the more we can move towards objective experiences. And I can say that because I did that process. I went from the illusory experiences to working on my own psychology and my own meditational practice and different things like that. And then ultimately resulted in me being able to do objective experiences and to even do scientific experiments. So that's what I'm saying, that with the weight of that journey and that science behind it. So I think to really understand or to get beyond the belief systems, we have to sort of go to science. And science doesn't necessarily have to mean in a laboratory and, you know, with some authority figure who's got multiple PhDs or something. Science is a method. I actually refer to it as the ultimate meditation, because science is the way of understanding or perceiving the world as it really is, kind of stripping away the beliefs and trying to get to the objective. So if we apply the scientific method to our experiences, then there's a good chance that we're going to get closer to what might be true. I don't claim to have the truth or know the whole story with these experiences. I'm on that journey trying to learn and understand through that methodology.
Okay, so I'm a simple man, Graham. So forgive me for these questions, but isn't it not like science, for example, doesn't it only apply to our rules here? And if you go somewhere else, like for example, that doesn't have gravity or doesn't, like, then our science doesn't make sense there, right? Or am I just totally, is that?
Well, that's a different kind of question. It depends what you're asking. I mean, if you go to another reality, for example, and like I was mentioning earlier, and you interact with a person who you believe is also having an out of body, say two people arranged to go to a particular astral plane, let's say, to meet and have a dialogue, and then you do that, but then you go and talk to the other person and are like, no, I remember something completely different, or it didn't work, or whatever, then that's not to do with the environment or the physics or anything like that. Physics is a different question, but just the fact that whether you went to an objective place or whether whether there was something beyond your own mind that took place, that's what I'm referring to when I talk about science in that way.
Okay. Another simple man question, and you're gonna be like, dude, you're just going straight there. You're on your path, you said. You're trying to figure this out, but I guess what is your best guess as of now of why we're here? Or is that the wrong question? Is that the question everyone keeps asking? It's the wrong question, maybe? What is your thoughts on that? Like, why, if it is just our mind and let's say when we pop out, it's creating, like, if someone, it's a good point, because someone like, I interviewed this gentleman, and he's like, I've been out hundreds of times. I'm telling you, we are captured here, right? But I'm like, I don't know his background. I don't know like what his life is like. I don't know anything. So what if his brain really does think that? And there's a lot of people who are fearful like that. And so it's generating that kind of thing when he comes out, because then you have people like Robert Monroe, and you read his books and you go like, all right, this guy doesn't seem to be like
individuals, though. These are just people. I think we've got to ask the question, if someone says that and you're considering taking that belief on, because it is a belief, then you have to ask yourself, is the kind of the reason, the weight of evidence or the weight of conviction strong enough in you to feel that is the right thing to take on board? Because there are so many ideas. There's Gnosticism and the demiurge, and that everything was created by this kind of evil being. Or there's Hinduism with Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. There's, you could just go on and on listing all these different beliefs. Mm-hmm. Every culture had completely different belief systems. And I think it's the same with individuals. But you can see threads of consistency through these cultures. Some of them are psychological threads, just the fact that human beings, like you mentioned, can be fearful by nature. So they might have fears of, the dark or whatever it might be. But there are sort of consistencies in terms of people believing in some kind of spirit, some kind of continuation after death. The nuances, the kind of packaging can be different, but the core is I think consistent often across different cultures. So I guess what I'm trying to do is sort of focus on that core aspect and kind of say, okay, so there's this idea out there that we're in some kind of prison reality, but what really is the sort of, is there anything objective or tangible that could make me believe that? Because it's got to be pretty strong evidence for me to want to take on a very negative worldview. You know, it's
I
sort of,
agree with that so much. It's when I
yeah,
hear that theory, I'm like, why would I? I literally said it in my interview. I was like, well, I don't, because the gentleman I was talking to, he's like, look, people just don't want to be uncomfortable. And I was like, I don't think it's uncomfortable. You're just not painting a good vision. Like, why would you want to buy into that? If that's the truth, you're better off not knowing. Because then it
yeah.
just sounds like if we're trapped, then we're trapped. And I'd rather not know about it. And I'd rather believe that love is the cure, because then at least I have good moments with my family, right? And otherwise, it's a horrible way to live, to think about that.
Well, exactly. And to me, like I said, the evidence would have to be pretty strong for me to kind of take on that kind of idea. So I think it comes down to maybe a more, you know, I think the great thing about maybe not having the answers is that you can take a more simplistic kind of positive way of approaching life and the whole question, rather than, I think it's a mistake as well. Human beings have this tendency, I do it, everyone does it, where you want to explain things, you want to kind of have the answer. It feels good to have the answer, you know, to be like, yeah, this is how it works. But the danger is it's almost certainly not going to be correct. If you think about it statistically, what's the likelihood of one random person in a world of billions of people actually being right about most things? The likelihood is more reasonable that you're probably wrong about a lot of things, and that's okay. You know, I think we need to be more okay with not knowing the answers. You know, I get that it's seductive. We want to know the answers, but I think it's still the wrong way to go.
I think what's interesting too is like just the nature of ideas, right? The more that someone, let's just use Darius for an example. And again, I learned from the man. So I have nothing against anything he says. I actually agree with a lot, or it sounds nice. I haven't experienced anything, but it sounds like an area I'd like to align with. But ideas, right? The more they spread, the bigger it gets, the more people get behind it. So it would make sense that more and more people then who buy into that idea, that when they do actually achieve something like an OBE, that's the world they see. And then it confirms it for them. They're like, okay, so he's right. I saw the soul records. I saw these things that he talks about. And so they go back down or back into your body, and they're telling everyone, I'm telling you, the guy's right. He said what he said. I saw that. And you can kind of see how that would happen. And it makes you feel like,
Yeah, no, I did it too. You know, like I was saying, like when I was with Douglas Baker, he was coming from a sort of theosophy angle, so he was quoting Leadbeater and Alice Bailey and all these different people, you know, like I mentioned, A.E. Powell and people like that, all these writers who were saying all these things in the kind of late 1800s, early 1900s, and it does feel like, wow, I've really kind of got the answer. But I think over time I started to realize that that's not really the case. I've had people say to me before, oh, but because you have this scientific perspective, that's why you're not seeing these things. And it's kind of like, well, actually I did see these things, like majorly, because I started off the same way as everyone else. And when I started back in the early 90s, there was late 80s, early 90s, there was like the main material that you could find was either occult literature or theosophical literature. That was sort of the main information on these kind of topics. And they were heavily laced in belief systems that, again, don't have a lot to kind of back them up. See, people would be quite happy, I think, you know, to dismiss a lot of the ideas in those writings from back then, but they were the popular ideas of their day, kind of thing. And I think the same will happen with the ideas that are popular now. So yeah, I think you're right that it's probably more to do with what people expect to see than what's actually going on.
Super interesting to think about. Okay, so nowadays, when you are, I know you teach classes and you have stuff on your website, you revise your book. What are you, when you're popping out, for lack of a better term, what are you focused on? Are you focused strictly on the science? Do you ever explore just to have fun? Do you?
No, of course I do. Of course I do. I mean, I guess I'm talking from more now because we started off talking about the people on the fence and so I'm talking very from the perspective of like what I think is a healthy way to approach the topic. But in terms of my own experiences, yeah, I tend to let them unfold naturally a lot more now. Whereas I think early on I was very much trying to control them and, do specific. Whereas now I find that when I let them unfold naturally, I seem to have more profound experiences. I seem to be guided to places that have some relevance or some kind of interesting experience, or even an experience of nature, for example, in an amazing way where I see it from a different perspective. And although a lot of these things are subjective, I still completely embrace them. I just remember that they're subjective. I don't turn around to someone else and say, oh, this subjective experience, yeah, that I had must be true for everyone. I just think that could be my filter, for example, like with the Soho precognitive experience, and several experiences related to that. I saw everything in this kind of bluish grey. Now, this could be something that's a universal that might be related to out-of-body experiences in general, but we don't know that yet. So it could also just be my personal filter, the way that I was in my brain or my consciousness was interpreting what was happening on that particular occasion. So I think that it is a lot to do with the interaction between the personal and the external, or the subjective and the objective, which is true of everything in life. There's lots of people who their entire life is based around a religious experience, and they could not imagine a life outside of that experience. And then someone who lives next door to them might have absolutely no relationship to that reality that person's living. And that's something on the physical. That's like two people living next door to each other in the world. So when you take that into a non-physical context, or like beyond the physical, then it's
all bets are off. It's the Wild West.
Tricky. Yeah.
No, I listened to an interview the other day, and again, I get caught up in these things, Graham. I can't help it, but I watch it and then I go, "Whoa, he makes good points." I think I'm still new on my journey too, just trying to figure things out. I really like how you talk, though. I think it's important, or how you think about things. I love that, right? Like not telling everyone just because you saw it that's the truth. That's really important. But this guy had this experience of going to hell, and it's the most vivid experience I've ever heard of someone saying it, right? And I was like, wow, like I don't feel like he could make that up on his own. So it makes me feel like he really did experience it, because you could just hear him say it, and it's just, again, it's gnarly. And then I'm like, how do you convince that guy that what he experienced wasn't real, right? And he's going to live his whole life now, unless he experiences something different, right? But he's going to live his entire life now as a Christian, because that's what it confirmed for him.
I'm not saying it's not real. I'm not saying any of these things are not real, because that again would be me telling other people.
Mm-hmm. No, I know you're not. I know you're not.
What to believe. I think what I'm saying is, but take that experience with that grain of salt, that objectivity, that, okay, I experienced that, but does that mean that it was? I mean, it could have been the most real thing ever, but does that necessarily still mean that it was real? It's a, and when I say real, I mean something that objectively exists, that other people are also going to experience if they go through a similar scenario. Because with near-death experiences, most people have a positive experience, but there is a smaller category of people who have negative experiences. So, but again, is that because of them, or is that because of the nature of the experience, or is that because of the drugs that they were given, or is that because of, there's a lot of possibilities. I think that hell is a real place that you're probably going to go to. Is probably quite far down my list of possibilities.
Sure.
There's a lot of options before that.
No, I think it's important we bring it up. The reason I brought it up is because I was saying that was like his first out of body type experience. So it was more of a near death experience. Actually, he got shot 2 times or something, so that caused it. But I think it's important we talk about it because everyone listening might pursue this, and I don't want them to run with their first experience. Like whatever happens right away, that's it. They figured it out. I think it's really important that you talk about, okay, there's other things that could be going on. Oftentimes they'll use the example of an atheist. Like atheist dies, confirms now he's a Christian, and that'll be like, everyone will be like, that's proof. But I would argue that an atheist is very much so thinking about Christianity or other religions throughout their life, right? Because they're so determined to prove that there's not a God or that there isn't anything. It's actually a big part of their life. So it makes sense to me that when they died, that they would experience something like that. And again, it goes back to what you said is like, it could be just what you're thinking about. I mean, that could be totally it.
Well, you just mentioned the guy with the hell thing, that he was shot. I mean, if you think about kind of psychology, that's a pretty big suggestion, really, isn't it? Like, you've literally had something, penetrating your body, and, you think you're going to die. I mean, that's going to have a psychological impact, if anything will,
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not, I think the important thing to say is it's not about demeaning or putting down anyone's experience. I don't believe in that at all. But I'm saying that I apply this same approach to my own experiences. I have completely amazing, transformative, spiritual experiences, and I take them for what they are. I just don't apply them to other people. That's kind of how I look at it.
I love that. Do you mind explaining briefly your Soho experience for people who haven't heard about that before? Like what
Sure.
you were doing, because you were in a group, right? I mean, this was more of would love for you to kind of give the background of what happened. It's a fascinating story.
Well, this was in sort of 99, so quite a long time ago. And I just developed that year, the G technique. I was doing a lot of research, and I built structures to help induce OBEs, and I was developing early form of the sound technology I worked with. I'd been training in Ericksonian hypnosis and NLP to try and help to induce the experience. I was doing all kinds of research and experimentation, and I'd been looking into pilots when they're doing like training to be pilots, where they do like G-force training, where they put them in a huge centrifuge and it spins at high velocity. They will sometimes have out-of-body experiences in that machine, and this got me kind of curious, and I was like, well, I wonder if you could. Obviously, you can't replicate that, literally, but maybe you could try to do something that works with that kind of technology. So I started to think about breathing techniques and muscle tension techniques, which is similar to what they use with the training, the G-force training. So I started experimenting with different methods and forms of using breathing and using muscle tension. And then that ultimately developed into what I call the G technique, which I found a really effective way to get to the vibrational state, or to get to what I generally refer to as the pre-state. I think the key to out-of-body experiences is actually the pre-state, be that being on the edge of sleep, or be that in a deep exhaustion state or a sensory deprivation state or something like that, where you're kind of on the edge of awareness and non-awareness, kind of on that, in that liminal place. So I think that's really the key, way more important than any technique or visualization or anything like that. So I developed this approach that was designed to get you into the right pre-state. So I arranged to meet with a few friends. We hired a room, and I basically was teaching them this methodology. And I started doing the technique, and I actually felt like nothing was happening. It was funny. It was kind of like I was starting to have doubts. I was like, oh, maybe this technique isn't that effective. Maybe I was wrong, you know, even though I'd had good results with it for the last sort of 3-4 weeks or something. But somehow I just felt, but then suddenly I just felt this overwhelming, it's really hard to explain, but kind of, I just felt overwhelmed, let's put it that way. I just felt this kind of overwhelming emotion, or sort of energy, or something like that. And I felt kind of unstable. So I went down onto the ground, and as soon as I got to the ground, basically I just went out of body, and I was moving like instantly through this natural forest-like environment, jungle, not forest, sort of more like tropical initially. And there was kind of like a stream, and there was kind of all plants. I don't know why that part happened, but this is how it happened. And then that experience seemed to kind of break open, and I found myself standing on the corner of Moore Street and Old Compton Street, which is in Soho in central London. And the kind of the road sort of makes a point because the two roads intersect. So there's a kind of a pavement, sort of a point made by the concrete. And so I was standing there in the out-of-body experience. Everything had this bluish grey quality to it, my visual field. And I kind of looked around, and I looked to my right, and I saw this restaurant called the Polo Bar, which I knew well, because I knew this part of London really well. And then I looked down the street, and around 150 meters, something like that, this explosion just burst out from the right-hand side. Just saw this kind of debris kind of burst across the street, and then I saw people kind of running and, you know, kind of reacting, and a guy run close by me towards the explosion. I guess he was trying to help or something. And then I felt this emotional wave kind of hit me in the chest. And it felt like the kind of, maybe something to do with the emotions or the intensity of the people what they just experienced. And this wave kind of hit me in the chest, and it brought me out of that environment, and I went into a kind of womb-like, void-like kind of environment. And I just I just stayed in that environment for a while. But people in the room, especially a guy called Chris and Lawrence, if people want to see me talking about this, there's a video on my website and on my YouTube channel where I go into details about it on the 10th anniversary of when it happened. Maybe not the 10th, but anyway, it was the anniversary. And it's got Lawrence, who was one of the people who was there. He's talking about it as well. So they kind of coaxed me out of it. Basically, they noticed that something very powerful had been happening, that I was in some kind of intense experience. So they were trying to kind of bring me out of it. I remember Chris especially was kind of whispering something to me, and that was sort of slowly bringing me out of it. And Lawrence was kind of saying stuff as well. But so I gradually came back into the room, and then I had this strong conviction that what I'd seen was something that was going to happen, that it was a precognitive experience. I'd never had anything like that before. I'd never had any kind of precognitive experience, but I had this conviction that that's what it was. And so I described to them the whole event. I described to them what I'd seen, that it was on Old Compton Street, that it was in a bar, all of the details that I remembered. And then 5 days after that out-of-body experience, there was a bombing on Old Compton Street in a bar, exactly as I'd seen it in the OBE. So that was the Soho experience, which I don't know of any experience with witnesses of something like that out there, really.
Yeah, fascinating. I think that's the video where I was like, all right, I'm inviting this guy on. It was fascinating. Can we talk a little bit about what you've built? It's called what's it called?
Infraliminal.
Infraliminal. What is it? Why is it sold out? Why can't I get it? Or can I get it?
No, you can get the download. It was just the physical version is sold out.
Well, when are you making more? What's the deal?
Well, I think it's better to just go with the downloads anyway, because the downloads are easier for people. They don't have to wait for things to be shipped and that kind of stuff. But anyway, so what it is, okay, so most people have experimented with binaural beats, including me, but I didn't find that it very effective. I didn't find that it really, it didn't get me to anything much, really. I felt relaxed and kind of in a sort of meditative state, but that was kind of all that it really had the effect on me. That was all it did, really. So I started to think, well, it does make sense that sound would be able to kind of alter our state. Obviously, music has a big emotional impact on us. It does make sense to me that frequencies and sound could do something. So I started researching different possibilities. So like I mentioned earlier, I was looking into hypnosis, I was looking into all different things in terms of research. And then I also came across some studies that had looked at infrasound, which is basically low-level sound frequencies just on the border of hearing. So very, 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 very low-level frequencies. And in this research, people had unusual experiences. They'd been able to perceive things, they'd seen ghosts or different things like this. So it kind of made me interested. I wonder if infrasound can be a catalyst that could have this kind of impact. So I started to experiment with different sound frequencies using neurofeedback. So I had a neurofeedback set up. And on one occasion, I went into the vibrational state. So the pre-state to the out-of-body experience, I had this sense of vibrating and electrical sensation kind of running through my body. And this was all recorded in our neurofeedback data. So I knew what was going on, or we knew to some degree on a sort of EEG level what was kind of going on in my brain when that happened. So we set about trying to replicate that through sound frequencies. So playing different sound frequencies, different infrasound, to see if it had an impact on my brain waves, on my brain state. And we did find that certain patterns, certain frequencies through trial and error over time would replicate, would help me to attune myself to that vibrational state. And then I also added in subliminals, so subtle hypnotic suggestion to help with the process as well. So that's where the name infra and liminal, so infrasound and subliminal messaging combined together, and that's what I created, and that's what it is. And I find that a very high proportion, it's over 80% plus, people get to the vibrational state with that. You still have to get that step further to the out-of-body experience, but it can help get you consistently to the launch pad, to the vibrational state. So that's what it's designed to do, basically. And the second track, that's the first track, Infraliminal 1, the vibrational one. And then I have a kind of a complementary one that sort of works with that one, but is the best way to do it. But the other track is Deep Mind, and that one is more for kind of programming and relaxation. So that one is designed to help people who are using like sleep techniques, like sleep interruptions and, trying to do it through lucid dreaming and things like that. So that's what that one's for. So that one's more relaxing and sounds like water, and it's very peaceful. So you can listen to that as you fall asleep. Whereas the infraliminal one is more kind of like frequencies. So it's a bit more intense to listen to. So the two together are kind of like they cover the whole field, I guess.
Love it. Okay, so the first one though, is it intended to be done before bedtime, or is that one of those that you could do whenever? You just need to be quiet.
You can use it whenever. It's the idea is it's to help you get to the vibrations. So with my way of teaching, so in my book, in my courses and whatever, I try to do things based on the individual. So even the book has a questionnaire. So the idea is that you select the right technique for you. A lot of people teach in this way where like one size fits all. This is the technique. That's it. You do this technique, end of story. But I realized very early on with my teaching that doesn't work for a lot of people. Because let's take, for argument's sake, we'll take me. I'm not a very natural lucid dreamer. Never been particularly like a strong dream person. So if someone came to me and said, "Oh, use lucid dreaming to learn to have out-of-body experiences," I would have been like, "Well, that's not really very good for me, because I know that I'm not very good with dreaming." I developed the ability to do lucid dreaming, but again, it's not my main skill. So I used techniques that were more trance-based, more like hypnosis or deep meditation, and those approaches work much more effectively for me. I also use things like sensory deprivation mixed in to help get deeply into an altered state of consciousness. So I realized early on that people are different, and that some people work better with sleep and dream methods, some people work better with conscious methods, some people are somewhere in the middle, so basically I realized that that's sort of the best approach to take with people learning.
Okay, I'm going to say this. Everyone's going to get pissed off. It happens every time, because a lot of people on the internet, for whatever reason, assume that anyone who charges something or has a course they equate that with not being real, for whatever reason. And to me, it reminds me of like, you could go to the gym. You are free to step outside, do some push-ups if you want, but sometimes it's nice to pay a trainer, someone who does it, and learn, right? Instead of spending your own time. So I want to say that first off, for all you haters out there. Number two, it's $20 to get his book.
Actually, cheaper if you get
not $10 if you get Kindle. Yeah, so get the book. Okay, if you really want, if you want to learn, because I love your approach. I mean, you acknowledge that it's different for everyone. That is true. I've had so many people say to me, "I can't do lucid dreams." Even me, right? I'm like, well, I don't know how to induce a lucid dream, right? I just randomly figure it out, and then even then, what do I do? So I love that you said that, and we're talking about $10,
to say the thing about, I think it's interesting with the whole kind of money side of things and stuff like that, because it's like if someone wants someone to create things like the Infraliminal or produce a book, or all of these kind of products and things that help people, then it's like I'm just one person. It's kind of like if I had to do a full-time job and then try to do all of this research and do all these things to help people with this kind of practice, it wouldn't be workable. You would never be able to do it. And ultimately, I didn't really set out to do this for a living, but it's kind of like you write a book and then someone says to you, "Oh, can you teach me to do this?"
Yeah, of course.
And then someone else says it, and then someone else says it, and before you know it, what are you going to do? You're going to kind of not do it as a job, even though people want.
It's my number one pet peeve that people get upset. It literally is. I think it's insane. Even with podcasting, right? It's like people don't understand that I'm waking up early, 4 a.m. every day just to do it. And I'm not saying woe is me. I want to do it. I enjoy doing it. But eventually, right, if I wanted to do this full time, you got to figure that out. And if people enjoy listening or people, anything, they enjoy how you teach or want to learn, I mean, it's just insane to me that anyone, I think those people.
And if it was about money, I would tell people what they want to hear. I wouldn't be sitting here saying, you know, I don't have all the answers.
You'd say this is the method. This is what. This is
you
it.
know, and this is the, you know, and you're going to have like all these experiences are real, and you can prove all of this stuff, like that, you know, heaven exists or whatever. You know, that's the angle you go if you ultimately want to make millions out of this kind of thing. And I do not make millions out of this, you know.
It's the same people to me who are like, I'm not rich yet because I can't afford that course that you have. And I'm like, well, I think there's other reasons you're not rich yet. You know, like you got to start looking at yourself, buddy. Okay. I mean, Graham, I have had a lot of fun talking to you. This is a fascinating subject. I'll say it again. I'm not here to just toot your horn, but I do really enjoy the way you come about things and the way you,
Thank you.
Speak about out-of-body experience. I think we need more people like you. So I hope you get your YouTube ramp back up and maybe stop being so critical of social media, because it can help, man. It can help a lot.
It's actually, I mean, it's not that I was so critical of it. It was just that, you know, I had some personal stuff in my life that I was dealing with, and you know, I needed a break from doing that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I do think there's a value to it for sure. I guess I'm only one person. There's only so much time in the day. So, you know, I try to kind of keep a balance and maybe focus on the things that I think are really important. And the things that I do that no one else is doing, which is like focusing on the evidence and the science and the new technology and the new research and things like that. I'm working with Precognition in Italy at the moment. He's one of the few scientists in the world who's doing research into out-of-body experiences, and we're kind of creating a kind of protocol for out-of-body experiences, which is something that no one's ever done before. It exists for near-death experiences, but it doesn't for out-of-body experiences. So it's something that we're working on right now. So yeah, it's I really want to kind of focus on those really valuable things for people.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, I appreciate you. I'd love to have you on for round 2. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with? I'm going to link your YouTube, your website, your books, all that stuff. But anything you want to end with when it comes to out-of-body experiences?
I think just you know, experience it. Have like I think they are the greatest experiences probably that we can have, and I think if people do take that step and learn to have these experiences, I think it can completely transform your life, and it can bring a kind of real inner peace and things like that as well. I think that's something that, you know, talking about the spiritual side of it and the kind of transformative side of it, I think it's really given me this kind of inner calm and sort of this connection, like feeling of interconnection with life around me and things like that, and compassion that I didn't have growing up in kind of a, you know, quite a rough, difficult part of London where I grew up. So I think, you know, I think it's a really transformative and beautiful experience, and I think that's that is the great thing about it.
All right, Graham Nicholls, everybody, you heard it here. I appreciate you, and I will let you know when this goes live.
Thank you.
All right, Graham, we'll talk again soon, man. Cheers.
Okay, take care. Bye.